In today's 10-minute book talk, I want to rave about a book that I've just finished, that I've just completed. It is So Much Love by Rebecca Rosenblum. Now, I've written up a blog post, a review of this, that is a little tighter, of course, in its details. But I really want to kind of move away from that. This is a beautifully written, highly intricate book. It's the story of a woman named Catherine, who is a bookie person, as most of the people actually in the story are sort of bookie people, and bookish people, I guess. And she has kind of fallen in love with this particular poet, that's a local poet who had been tragically killed just at the beginning of her career. And then Catherine's reading her poetry, and then she herself is kidnapped. And as she sits alone in the dark, what she has is, beyond the memory of a loving husband, a loving mother, she actually has the poetry of this other poet who had come before her. And the story then is sort of an interweaving of these different tales, because it looks like the original poet who was killed is sort of a pattern for how Catherine can live. And so leaves the reader with this question, will Catherine survive, and what does survival look like? The book actually moves past kind of your standard kidnapping tale in that it's not a race to some sort of break the door down kind of finish. I mean, there are tensions and kind of action moments and things like that. There are actually moments of like kind of violence that sits right on the edge. But Rosenblum has this kind of way of writing it that at one point brings us so intensely close to it that we almost feel uncomfortable in reading, but at other points gives us a chance to kind of pull back and see the whole thing from a different angle. And angles are really important in this book, as are personalities. So the point of view keeps shifting in this book. Each chapter is a different way of looking at the story. The voice changes, the perspective changes, the limit of knowledge changes, and actually the time changes. So we don't get a kind of a completely linear path in this book, but a series of episodes that are woven together. Rebecca Rosenblum is a Canadian writer, literary fiction, but primarily a short story writer, and so this novel comes together in these various kinds of ways. And so you get this effect of all the action orbiting around this main Catherine character. This is actually done pretty well. It's not always done well, so that you end up with some of these short story collections that move into novels. Some of these compound stories are actually not always elegantly put together. This one is sometimes challenging, but it's challenging because of that perspective, the voice, the way that she wants to kind of shift and destabilize our position. Now, usually in fiction, this destabilizing of the position of the reader is this kind of postmodern effect that's meant to kind of, put us into disillusion and to make us kind of challenge the distance between the book and the reader. In this case, though, it actually, for some reason, draws us close. And I think it's because of the second element, is that Rebecca Rosenblum has this incredible, intense attention to detail about the way that people interrelate. You get this in like 18th century and sometimes 19th century writing, where you get, like every dewdrop and every leaf in the scene is described, right? And it's not like that. It's not overly detailed. This is actually a really brief book. My copy is 270 pages. But, there are little actions and eye contact moments and slight moments of touch and breath, and the mannerisms that people have, their nervous twitches, their habits, the way they relate to the world around them. All of that is described briefly and with a kind of poignancy that actually allows us to really imagine the scene in perfect kinds of ways. There are actions that without words that all of a sudden create an entire depth of meaning that you wouldn't have imagined otherwise. So those two elements, I think, the shifting point of view combined with the detail, does something that a lot of these kind of compound stories or a lot of the postmodern novels can't do, which is invite me to walk with the characters. Often these kind of short stories that come together, we don't get to know the character, or the characters are like insipid or people that we want to hate. Even in this book, and this is really remarkable, there are characters that are insipid and characters that we should hate, and yet in most cases, not all, in most cases, we're actually drawn in to try and see things from their point of view in such a way that we don't forgive the characters necessarily. We don't let them off. There's some terrible things done here. But we actually see things in a deeper way, and we see that it's not simply as easy as someone is just totally evil and somebody else is totally good. This is patterned not after a fairy tale, but after books like The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Leo Tolstoy, where there's this constant interior questioning of what life's meaning is. There's these terrible things happen, and there's this incredible beauty. What does it all mean? How does that sit together? In Ivan Ilyich's case, the beauty was, all the richness of his own life. Intriguingly, a writer like Ella Montgomery, it's, the beauty of nature or something like that. But with Rebecca Rosenblum, it's actually poetry is the beauty. Poetry, books, story, and then relationship. There are two characters who are male and violent, and yet this author is not sucked into the myth that then all males are violent. There's one character in particular who's incredibly empathetic and incredibly supportive, and generally sometimes unsuccessful at that, and yet is totally authentic. And there's a secondary male character who has those traits too. We just don't see them as much. So there's a kind of complexity to this book that really, has kind of opened up my eyes, I think, to what is possible in writing. Something I hadn't thought of before. Is this a perfect book? No, I wouldn't say, it's a perfect book. And in a 10-minute talk, I don't really want to take too long going into imperfections. I was challenged at the beginning of each of the chapters to kind of understand what was going on. I think that's intentional. I think Rosenblum wants this to be a book where the reader has to commit something, and maybe that's why it works so well. Is I'm committed to this book. I'm going to darn well find out what the inside meaning is, right? And then the second thing that I don't. She has this really incredible experiment. We have the change of time, right? We have various kind of times all the way through. We have the change of point of view and the change of voice. And she's genius at voice. And I love the point of view experiments that she does, the different kind of narrative persons. I don't know that it's always perfect, that those choices, and there's some risk there, and I think that literary critics might disagree on this particular point, but I do admire kind of the courage and the effort and the energy that goes into this, because this is a book that really kind of it challenges what I think we think of as what a novel has to be. And I've compared her in my blog to, Michael Crummey, a Newfoundland author who, like Rebecca Rosenblum, really gets to the heart of incredibly difficult things. Crummey is more, local, very local, often Newfoundland. And, but together they don't really give us a chance to escape that much. And I've also compared her to Vincent Lam, another Canadian author, and his Bloodletting and Miraculous Cures, which is also a series of short stories brought into a novel. But I hated the characters. I guess I had some empathy near the end, but I did not love the characters in that book. But, I wonder if actually Alice Munro might be actually the kind of book, the kind of author that Rebecca Rosenblum, could be ascending to. And I hope then, with these, scattered comments of general love about what is a beautiful book, that you haven't, forgotten that there's a good story there. And so I hope that you actually pick up this book, So Much Love. It's available in Kindle as ebooks and as well as in this gorgeous book cover. And I hope you give this a try, because I think this is an author who's been recognized, with great reviews and stuff, but literary fiction has a tendency to grow slowly. And if you're outside of Canada, you may not have heard of it in your own reviews and papers and journals and stuff like that. So this is my 10-minute book talk. Feel free to kind of reach out to me with comments and questions. I would love if you like this YouTube page, like the blog at pilgriminarnia.com, where I do most of my work, and please share it, especially if this is a book that you think you would like, or this is one that you would enjoy.